is a D6 generation pip. Yeah, one of those dots on the side of a six-sided die. Yeah, a pip. A short pip. Little something. About anything gaming related. Sometimes featuring Craig, sometimes featuring Russ. We'll see what's coming up today.
We are live at Dunkin' Donuts for real.
Yeah, this is kind of exciting. It's our first actual recording physically in a Dunkin'
Donuts.
So if you hear any background noise,
that's what it is.
It's because we are actually in Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah, this place is a lot louder than the proverbial Dunkin' Donuts in the middle of the universe.
It is actually, yeah. So because it's real. It's more authentic, right? Mm-hmm. You may hear people call for donuts or coffee.
You may.
And if you hear that, that's because it's actually happening.
Right. We're intrigued by how this is going to work.
So this is literally like the night we're going to go game.
Yep.
We just had a lovely dinner.
We did
at our favorite Mexican restaurant.
Yes, La Carreta.
And now we're here at Dunkin' Donuts. But we want to talk about the game we've been playing a lot lately.
That's right.
And it was actually lost in a lost episode.
It was.
A real lost chapter.
We have one lost chapter, and this is it.
Yep.
One real, actual lost chapter.
Our discussion of Dropfleet Commander.
We did. Completely dropped it, if you will. We dropped the Dropfleet.
How many games have we played now?
We're on 4 or 5, I think of most recently.
It might be a stretch to call them complete games.
Yeah, yes.
Because we generally end them early, because the challenge we're having is we're enjoying the game so much that we keep trying to create our fleet sizes larger without really learning all the rules detailed.
Well, it doesn't help either that the game is so visually interesting that people are constantly walking up and talking to us. So,
and there are so many, I think there's like closet fans of Dropfleet Commander, because every time they see it, they're like, you play Dropfleet, I will play it. So it's almost like the game has got a really strong following, but they're all like secret fans.
Right, yeah, or they don't talk to each other.
So let's talk a little bit about why we like Dropfleet. We're got attracted to
it. Well, I mean, for me, it started visually, with like most of my games, or my interest in games do. So the fact that you're on an orbital board instead of just a star field looks amazing. The fact that you've got like the continents, you've got the geological features, you've got the cities, especially if you've got if you're boosting them with your cool resin like we have. Right. The ships themselves are really, really cool looking. There's 4 very distinctly different aesthetics involved in the 4 core. There's only 4 fleets. And so that's why I tried to get a demo for years since it first came out. Then when you and I finally got a chance to do the demo, so the aesthetic hooked me into the demo. But when we finally got to do the demo and I saw the signature plus scan mechanic of weapon ranges, that really hooked me in as an innovative mechanic that I really enjoyed. And then when I saw how bloody the game was and how fast, and it's not one of these, I mean, I love fleet games. So often they are maneuver, bang, the game's over. Right. This is much more of a slugfest. You can get in a position. I really enjoy it. What about you, Russ? What brought you in?
Most of the same stuff. First of all, the ships look fantastic. And secondly, I think what initially attracted me was this, like you said, the low orbit, and the opportunities for making the missions very compelling and interesting. So the fact that you're trying to go for objectives on the ground, and it's really all about delivering troops to those objectives, so protecting key ships so they can deliver, or maybe you're playing the spoiler, using ships that can attack those spots really well. The different areas you attack matter. And so all of a sudden, and because you're in orbit, it makes more sense that there's debris in orbit. Right. So there's terrain, because generally in a solar system, people are throwing asteroids and planets on the same table, and honestly, at a solar scale, that doesn't make any kind of sense. But it's fun, but it doesn't make any sense. So here you got something that actually makes a little more continuity sense. So it feels a lot more hard sci-fi, maybe the fleet engagement of games. The other thing about it I really like, to your point, there are 2 or 3 mechanics that really are compelling. First, the fact that you can adjust your altitude.
He's doing that on purpose.
I think it might be. You can adjust your altitude.
Yeah.
So, most fleet games pay only lip service to the fact that it's 3D. And here you can choose whether you're in high orbit, low orbit, or atmo. And now there's atmospheric type ships. You got to protect those. And being at different altitudes in those orbits affects your ability to be attacked and engaged. So that's really interesting. So you can drop down and avoid missiles and things like that. It's pretty neat. I think the thing that's but really that range system that you described, where each of your ships have a detection range, but then it's really what your opponent's ships do to increase their own signature, very much like submarine combat. All of a sudden it's a big deal, and there's actually weapons and mechanics.
So why don't you explain a little bit the signature scan mechanic?
Yeah, so each of your ships, so what's interesting about this game is weapons have no ranges.
Right.
So basically...
They have an infinite range.
Well, if you can see it, you can shoot it.
Right.
But the challenge is, can you see it? And so each of your ships have a detection range, right?
Yeah.
And that's typically 6 to 8 inches, right? Somewhere like that.
Yep.
And then your opponent's ships have a signature depending on what they're doing. So most ships have a default signature of something like 6 inches, but again, different fleets.
Yeah.
Some fleets are more
frigates
stealthy.
are 3.
Right.
And the battleships, I think, are generally 8 or 12.
So if your detection distance is 6 and your opponent's signature is 6, it means your range is only 12 inches. In other words, we're in 12 inches of each other, we can see each other. What becomes interesting, though, is that giving your ships certain orders or having certain effects happen in the game can have what's called spikes on ships.
Yeah.
And there's a setting on your dials to show how many spikes are on your ship, and each spike adds 6 to your signature.
Yeah.
So if you are sitting there and your signature is 3 inches, but now you've got a spike on you, now your signature is 9 inches. You got 2 spikes on you, now your signature is 15 inches, plus my 6. Now we're starting to shoot near 20 inches.
Right.
If you got someone with a max signature and he's a battleship, I can hit you from half the table. Almost.
Yeah.
So that's really where the change happens. But then there's cool mechanics too, like if I choose an order to run silent, I can't fire anything, I can't turn anything, but my signature drops to 0.
Right.
So now I'm really hard to see and hit. But now my fleet's got some cool ships that can anybody can actively ping another ship.
Active scan.
Which active scanning makes your signature very large, but it also can ping one ship and put a spike on them.
Yeah.
So there's a really cool set of mechanics that make it feel very naval, particularly for submarine players, but also gives it a very unique space feel.
Yeah.
And it adds a really cool dimension to the game.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's sort of the core mechanic that really sucked us both in.
The whole obsession with objectives on the ground.
Yeah, that's
and I think those two things together make it one of the most compelling and strategic and tactical space combat games I've ever seen.
Yeah. And now the interesting thing, so what the version that we've been playing, which is sort of the default version, is all about these ground targets, where you have to have ships that can go into Atmo for the most part to drop, although you do have also bulk landers that you can take that can do it from low orbit. What we haven't done yet, but what we're hoping to do soon,
very soon,
is
that's what best in space stations,
Russ has some purchasing plans for this evening. Is space stations, adding space stations which are in high orbit. So now you've got Atmo and you've got high orbit, and you're going to start having to make some hard choices where you're going to send the ships. And you've got some ships, you've got basically 2 different kinds of ships. You've got strike cruisers, and each of those can drop 1 token. But then you have these troop ships that can drop 3 tokens twice.
Right.
So they're really flooding the area, but they can only do troops. Or these really cool defensive batteries that actually shoot down other people's troops when they try to get dropped, which is another mechanic we haven't really played with because we keep ending up having to stop at turn 3 or 4 in a 6-turn game. But yeah, so I'm really excited about that too, that aspect, the space station aspect, because the space stations then actually have active defenses.
Right.
They have a signature. Also, you can shoot the space stations if you can also, as a fun little nod to geek culture, you can nuke the site from orbit.
Oh yes,
if you want. And every ship has the potential of nuking from orbit, but it costs you victory points. In the missions, there are missions where you can completely devastate a space station and not have a negative impact, depending on what your mission is and what your objective is. I would say the next really cool thing for me is something that we haven't really seen since Babylon 5, which is this whole concept of orders.
Yes.
Right? Where when you activate your default is standard orders, and standard orders means you get to turn once up to 45 degrees at the beginning of your move, move from half to full, and fire 1 weapon. right? And nothing else. Oh, and it also removes one spike.
Right.
So it takes 6 inches
Your
away
signature
from your
drops a little
signature
bit,
if you're not already at your standard neutral signature. But on top of that, so you've got your standard orders. Then you have silent running, which Russ already said, which is exactly as you would expect from submarine warfare, where you're going all quiet and you can't do anything. Then you have weapons free, which is the only way you can fire more than one of your standard guns. And these ships are festooned with guns, which it's very fun to shoot.
Right.
So you're going to want to have yourself in position there. But the problem is that adds a major spike. So you've just added 12 inches to your signature.
Yeah, surprise, you fire your guns and people can see you.
And the people can see you, exactly. You can't turn because all of your power is going to your guns, and all of your focus is going to your guns. So there's lots of tactical choices that you have to make. You have to get yourself in position, and then you just kind of unload. There's station keeping, which means that you can go slower. There's course change, means you can turn more. There's max thrust, meaning you can go faster. But each of these, you can only do one of them, right? And what we haven't talked about, we'll talk about in a couple minutes maybe, is the your army or fleet composition, right? Is broken down into battle groups. So your battle group, think of that as like a brigade, or it's made up of multiple squadrons, basically. And the battle group can only take one order. Now, groups within the battle group can not take that order and instead go to standard orders, but that still only leaves you those two default positions, the one order that you've given the battle group or standard. That's all the only options that you have. So you've got a lot of choices that you have to make. And then active scan, which again we said is a way to add a small one spike to an enemy ship, but flares your ship so that it adds 12 inches to its spike. So you've got all these different options. And another cool thing, I should say, is that the bases that the ships come with track all this stuff.
Right.
So the base tracks your damage. It tracks your atmospheric level, your altitude, and it tracks your signature. So there's, it looks like a rainbow. It's like, and you've got to kind of, it's very.
It's a little fiddly, but what I love about it is it's almost a token-free game.
Right.
There's really no tokens on the board, and the way the bases are designed, they look really. It looks like a sci-fi, almost like a tactical board.
Yes, it does. Yeah. In fact, I painted mine with turquoise, I think, to make it look like it's glowing like a Star Wars tactical board.
I really like that element too, and what I think is really. It just gives you a very hard sci-fi feel.
Yes.
And I think another element of the game, I love games, we talked about before, Craig, I love games where the rules reflect the fluff, and the fluff is in the rules.
Right.
And we also, what I really like, and we talked before about how much we're both David Weber fans, and we like high-end sci-fi, a lot of detail. One of my favorite elements of the game is the fact that in the rule book, there's pictures of all the ships, but then when they go through each of the weapons by faction, they have little pictures of the bits on the model where the weapons are.
Right.
So as you're painting your model, you're literally visualizing what that bit of the model does.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at your models on the table, you know what they have. And I love, there's point defense turrets are like these little tiny things, and you can see what they look like. And I have little ships that are literally festooned, as Craig said earlier, festooned with all these little guns.
Yep.
And so I think to see all those little weapons festooned on there and to see them covered, it was awesome.
Yeah. And it's not just weapons either. It'll show you like the life pod locations. It'll show you the engines and the impulse. That's great. It's really, really cool. So every aspect of the game informs all the other aspects with it, which I think is fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about fleet composition in so far as the fleets that we've been fielding, right? So what we kind of wanted to do was sort of do a battle report, and it just didn't work out. So
maybe we'll do it in the future.
You'll never know. That could be a pip. There's a pip for every occasion. But so talk a little bit about the fleet that you're using now and how it's organized.
Well, what's really interesting about the game is based on your point value you choose to play it. There's like 3 levels of game.
Yeah.
That dictates how many battle groups, but also the types of battle groups you could build into your list. So, for example, you might have a Pathfinder battle group, which is mostly smaller ships, little squadrons, or you might have a flag battle group, which is like your biggest battleship and a bunch of support ships. So, what's neat about that is it doesn't really do it by a 4-sword chart like 40K does, but instead it does it by tonnage size and the amount of tonnage distribution you have to have these various battle groups.
Right.
And no single battle group can more than 33% of your list. And what's interesting, though, is you are free to decide how these ships are paired in these battle groups.
Right.
Mostly. While you're limited by a certain number of tonnage ships and frigate ratios, you can choose whether a Group A is all, corvettes.
And
or
we
frigates.
have two very different fleets. So
in my fleet, I tried to go with an idea of mostly pairing a capital ship with frigates. With one exception. I have one battle group that is 2 strong, heavy hitters, and it's kind of like my ships of the line. And so they kind of wade in there.
Activates, I get scared.
So the downside for that for me is I have one activation that's really scary, but then I have another activation, which is my battleship, which throws a lot of ordnance or attack craft and stuff, but it has 2 anti-attack craft with it, so it's kind of like doing 2 things at once. And another decision I made, which I'm not sure how I feel about, but I'm still experimenting with, is I have one battle group that is entirely Atmo ground attack. So I have these 2 frigates who are really, really good at going in atmosphere and dropping troops, and then sailing along with them is a capital ship that has assault boats that can drop down. And so those guys all activate together. Now, some of your ships have special rules that can break the core rule that is battle groups have to stay within a certain coherency.
Right.
So each squadron in the battle group has to maintain coherency, and that distance is dependent on ship size. And then each battle group overall has to maintain coherency. But some ships have rules where their little squadron can be separate from the group, or even ships within their squadron go anywhere you want. So we have all those. So I've got very distinct roles for each battle group.
Right.
One other thing that was sort of interesting that I learned about this was, and I'm still evolving my battle group selection, although the other consideration you want to worry about is the overall strategic rating of your battle group. So essentially all the tonnage of your ships kind of adds up to a strategic rating. So the less tonnage in a battle group, the lower the strategic rating. And that's good because the way activations work in this game is you take
another cool innovative mechanic.
So each of your battle groups gets an associated battle group card. And the way the game is meant to be played, there's a separate set of playing card-sized cards where you write the name of each ship on them and you write the strategy rating in the corner. Then during the start of each turn, players organize these cards in the order they'd like to activate their battle groups. We put them face ground down in front of us, and then we say 1, 2, 3, flip. We both flip the battle group we want to activate, and whoever has the lower strategic rating, i.e. the more nimble battle group, if you will, gets the choice to activate first or second. So you can either see what your opponent's going to do, or go ahead and activate first. And activating includes moving and shooting. So that's a big deal. So you're now choosing to start your turn. So what I didn't really consider as much like making some of these really large groups is my groups are really powerful, but most of them are very slow. I didn't make any nimble, high activation squads that could get something done first, or force Craig to move a unit. I think Craig's fleets, their groups are more nimble, but I can't tell if that's a function of how I built mine or just your faction in general.
Well, I think it's how it's built. Because so you have 4 battle groups that are basically divided by role. I have 4 battle groups that are sort of divided by role, but not entirely. I mean, I have 5. So right off the bat there, I've spread my points over 5 activation cards instead of 4. So generally speaking,
that's smart.
Each
mine are all heavier now.
Each card is going to be lighter than your cards overall. And what I have my battleship, and my battleship is unaccompanied. So you have your battleship with 2 frigates that are crazy little missile boats that are just going to knock any missile or fighter or bomber out of the sky.
They're Aegis. They're little quick defense guys.
Insane.
Awesome.
So Russ is rolling 20 some odd crazy dice every time I try to do a bomber run on anybody within 4 inches of this.
They create a bubble of anti fighters, bombers, and missiles. Basically.
It's crazy. And it basically is. It's just the no-go zone on the board for me. I have to be like, okay, so my carriers are going to end up someplace.
Except you have lots of burn through lasers, which don't worry about that.
The burn through lasers. Okay, so let's talk about that. Okay, so
let's talk about your fleet composition.
My fleet composition is much different. So my battleship goes unaccompanied, and my battleship is. It's got 2 basic roles. It's for taking out big ships because my fleet has it's a very cool aspect. Everybody has different kinds of weapons that give each fleet a totally different flavor. I have the post-human republic, right? So they're kind of like the metahumans, and one of the things that they're key to their makeup are broadside. They're really the only fleet that uses broadside-oriented weaponry extensively, and they have these weapons which are called in the game caliber cannons, which are the weapon system. The fluff is the weapon system is geared towards a specific type of target. So I might need a 3+ to hit against generic targets. But if it's a heavy caliber weapon, if I'm firing at a heavy ship or a super heavy ship, like a battleship, I get +1, so they're better at firing at whatever they're geared to. So my battleship has some really nice weaponry of that kind and 2 torpedoes, which is funny because only recently when we kicked up a notch did either of us end up with torpedoes.
How could you not? They're awesome.
Torpedoes are friggin' crazy. So I've got a battleship. Then my 4 other activations, I have one activation that's all my carriers. So I call my fleet a kitchen sink fleet in that it's everything I own. I can't expand anymore without buying new stuff.
It's not just grabbing a bunch of random crap. There's thought in it.
No, there's some thought behind it. I definitely put some thought behind it. So I have a battle group that is a carrier with 2 frigate carriers, which I don't think you have frigate level carriers, right? So the interesting thing is that your battleship is a battle carrier, right? And launches the same number of stands of bombers or fighters as my whole fleet or my carrier battle group, but it's spread out over more ships. So I have one battle group that's a carrier with 2 frigate-sized carriers. Then I have a ground assault battle group, which is my bulk carrier, my strike carrier, my big carrier that carries lots of infantry, my ground assault carrier, and he has 2 strike carriers, the smaller frigate-sized carriers with him. And then I have one of my Ajax, which is a light carrier that throws a ton of dice but only hits on 5s unless it's firing at frigates. So my 2 Ajax are really for clearing out frigates. And one of those is, and they each have one burn-through laser, and a burn-through laser is basically like a wave motion gun, right? Sure. And one of them is accompanied by 2 frigates with burn-through lasers. Right. So that battle group's got a lot of burn-through laser ability. And then the other Ajax is accompanied by 2 more strike carriers, and the strike carriers have what's called open formation as a rule, which means they don't have to stay anywhere in coherency with anybody else. So I effectively have 4 strike carriers, so that's 4 stands of infantry or armor that I can drop a turn, and my bulk carrier, which can drop up to 6 depending on where it is. But the problem is that I don't have any real heavy-hitting activations. So you've got a couple activations where you've got a carrier that's going to be launching stuff, and he's got, I think he has 4 frigates attached to him, the carrier, or somebody.
The carriers with 4 frigates.
Yeah, he's like, so that's 5 ships in one activation. The most I have is 3, and they're usually little ships. And then you have your battleship with its 2 Aegis frigates, but then you've got those 2 monster ships that are good at both bombarding from orbit, and you've got 2 burn-through lasers, I think, on one ship, which is like this crazy...
And they're really powerful, because he's
super
like a giant,
powerful, yeah. He's like a giant killer.
Yep.
And so I don't have any... Like, at no point in my fleet do I have one card where I flip and you're like, oh God, here it comes, you know? It's more... and which it shouldn't be, because I've got 5 activation cards. And so it's 2 totally different philosophies, I think, where I have more...
You're definitely more flexible and nimble.
I have more strike capability for the ground.
Slow but deadly hammer.
Exactly. And we haven't really seen that play out for me. The fact that I have double your number of strike carriers hasn't really been a benefit to me, which is...
Well, the one time I've seen it happen a couple times is like the one in our most recent game, I overcommitted early and kind of raced one of my ships forward.
Yes, you did.
Putting a huge spike on him.
Yeah.
And because you have so many activations, you were able to react to that and really blow that ship up early game. Now I would never do that again.
Right.
But I would say that's one of the risks of having a lower activation count. If I make... Now, conversely, if you were to make a mistake and I hadn't activated one of my hammers yet, I can capitalize. And we've seen that happen a couple times. Mm-hmm. But you can be a little more reactive, and it's harder for me to do something you can't counter for like going for ground targets and like that.
Right, absolutely. And I also think now in that game where you launched so you have a lot of carrier capability. You've got a cruiser level carrier. You've got your battle carrier. So what's the total number that you're seven?
So there's also a limit on total. We should talk about how fighters and bombers work too.
Yeah.
But there's another part the fleet composition is based on fleet size. There's a limit to the total number of launches they call them. You can have in your fleet. The maximum we can have is 15. I have 14.
Right. Yes.
So my battleship, which is a carrier, shoots 7 by itself. So it literally fires pretty much half the
one torpedo.
Plus one torpedo, which has 1 reload, so 2 torpedoes. Then I have between the capital ship carrier and some support craft there. That's the other 7.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of stuff. So I can really just. And what's nice about having the battleship have so many at once is during the turn we're doing this alternate activation like we said earlier with our fleet cards with our battle group cards, but then after that activation phase then it's the launch phase, and then you go back and forth based on type of craft you launch them. So by having one ship that does it, if I can set it up properly with my other smaller ships, I can kind of wait and see what you do, because the order of activation there is pretty important. How this works is they really did a good job with what I call from Battlefield Gothic days ordnance. Because unlike some of those other games, I've kind of seen fleet games do it one or two ways. Either ordnance is represented at all on the table, which doesn't really give you a good feel of it, or there's lots of tokens for it, which is great. But it's micromanaging, and the game comes a bunch of that, and you really want the game to feel like a fleet management game. What these guys do is that all your ships, your fighters or your assault boats or your bombers have a speed, a thrust. And if you're within normal thrust range and you decide to launch them, they immediately attack the enemy and go away. You don't put a token on the table. You just roll the attack dice.
You get that attack.
If they're more than half, but within double, you can launch them at it, and then you put the tokens on the base.
More than full, but within double.
Sorry, right, You put them on the base of the target, and they'll attack next turn. Which gives your opponent a chance to react, and also know they're coming.
Which is awesome, because it not only it gives you a chance to maybe put some fighters on the unit that's getting. So fighters are 100% defense.
Right.
Bombers are 100% offense. So it kind of breaks it down that way, it simplifies it.
Just add point defense.
Exactly, they add point defense. So you're rolling your point defense against these attacks to try to neutralize the attacks. So if you're more than the thrust away, but less than double, you're going to be putting the bomber tokens on the target, and then they have a turn to later in that activation, right, is when you activate your fighters. So you're not activating a carrier at a time. You're actually activating a type of launch at a time.
Right.
So all the bombers have to go one alternating groups. Then the fighters go alternating groups. Then the torpedoes go alternating groups.
Right.
So if you're within thrust range of bombers, you have no chance of
unless you've already got
launching
fighters
up, unless you've already if your fighters are up from a previous turn, then you can defend against.
Or you have those great little Aegis ships.
Those Aegis ships. Yeah, that's great. And so what I love about it is so if they're far away, like most of these bombers have a 12-inch range, so 24 inches, you could launch these bombers. But it's called time to target, which is not exactly what that means. But it's fun. It's a fun term, so we'll use it. And they get on the base. Now that gives your opponent some really cool, fluffy ways to deal with it. Whether it's loading it up on fighters, or you can try to evade. So if you take those orders that we talked about earlier, if you take the course change or max thrust order, that gives you a 50% chance of shaking any of those bombers, which is a cool side note. You can also do that to shake a torpedo, but the torpedoes cost a lot more. They're factored into your list as much more.
They're limited fire, usually one or two.
Limited fire, 1 or 2. And so on a 4 or 5, they lose lock that turn, but they don't go away. Only on a 6 do they actually go away completely. So on a 4, 5, or 6, the bombers or fighters are lost. Or actually only bombers, because you never have enemy fighters on your
fighters are just
ships.
defending themselves.
Right.
And fighters go away the turn you decide to spend them.
Exactly.
So they can hang out as cap as long as they don't get used. So it's what I love about this is They have great miniatures for this you can purchase, and sort of like generic ordnance that you can buy. Or Craig and I have been using some of the old stuff from our Babylon 5 days and Battlefield Gothic and stuff. So what I love about it is you see them on the table, and it gives you the visual of like fighters and bombers involved in the conflict, but you're not micromanaging it. It's very straightforward. And the other great little bits that are on the table is when you're doing those ground assaults. So in this phase, in the launch phase, you're also doing ground combat phase, and you're dropping infantry and tanks in these assault boats. And so it's great to have little models. They have tokens in the game for this, but Craig has dragged out from various points of Planetfall and other games. We have little models and tanks that we put that aren't quite the scale, but it's a cool visual. Next to these little cities, now you've got little infantry down there, so you get this real feel of like a complete engagement going on with ground forces, fighters, bombers, capital ships, frigates, ordnance, orders. It just really has that epic conflict feel, and you don't even mind the game because you may have guessed we played the game 4 times, about 2 to 2.5 hours a shot. And we've not fully finished a game. I think with practice,
they are not short games.
It's not going to be a short game, but it's an epic game that's fun, and the story's evolving and it's unfolding. And so I want to play to completion. I do feel like with a bit of practice and some consistency, we'll get down to probably 2.5 to 3 hours.
And being rude to people who want to come and talk to us.
And just tell people, don't talk to us. This game's awesome, but stop asking us questions. But I don't even mind. I mean, I just think it's a lot of fun. But I think that component right there of how the ordnance and that works is such an integral part to how the game functions, and you can't ignore any of those factors as you're building your fleet. Back to the fleet building, you can't ignore. You either need to have lots of point defense, or play with your own versions of those. And what's interesting about those is those counteract the problem of visibility, because those craft you don't have to have a signature to launch your fighters or bombers or your bombers or torpedoes at them. But you can shake them by dropping an atmo.
If you have a ship capable. Most spaceships, as you would think, are not capable of going into atmo. Some of them are. And we've actually seen that, where Russ had a load of bombers on one of my strike carriers, and it just dropped into atmo and shed them all.
And they all just had to return to base. But that's just a lot of fun about it. And the other thing that's nice about the game is I do like how the critical hit system works as well. So it's very elegant. As we mentioned, even your wounds are tracked in your base. So each base is a little peg, and the peg there's a little sticker with a number of wounds on a little peg holes below each one. So most ships are somewhere between, capital ships.
Don't be gauche, Russ. They're hull points.
Thank you. Most of those hull points are between HP. Are between like 11 and 12 per ship for a capital ship, maybe 8 or 4 for a frigate. Your battleships have an interesting sticker that goes up in 10s, so your battleships might be 18 to 20 to even higher on points. And as you do damage, so the combat system is really very simple. You roll some number of dice based on your weapons. You need some number to hit, a lock number to hit on the D6s, by the way.
And that's not going to be by ship. That's often by weapon type.
Right. So most time 3 or 4 to hit. Let's say you're rolling 4 or 5 or 6 dice. Let's say I get 3 hits on Craig's ship. Craig has an armor save. He makes those saves. Anything he gets through does a point of damage to the hull. If I roll any criticals, which is a number that is 2 or higher of my lock number I need, and there's modifiers for the lock number based on in different altitudes or range and things like that. So if I beat that number by 2, it's a critical, which means Craig gets no armor save. It gets right through. And then when the catastrophic damage occurs, that happens when the ship gets down to half its hull points. Right? So at the moment it hits half its hull points, we roll in the catastrophic damage table, and that might do additional points of damage. It might disable some systems that have permanent effect. That's the only time where you really need some kind of token or marker or just remember.
It's very rare.
It's actually pretty rare, and you kind of remember.
Usually, you're done.
But it's pretty interesting. But the game is very bloody because it's almost like as soon as you see blood in the water, you go after and kill the ship. It's pretty interesting. So I love that mechanic as well because it's enough to give you, and the ships explode too very often through the radius. It does damage to nearby neighbors. So I really like that mechanic as well.
Which makes sense because you're in orbital combat, right? You're not like way out in open space where you would never be so close. Although never is a weird term to use in speculative fiction. So
right. So what's our next steps in this game? I think we played like 3 or 4 games now of the basic scenario. We definitely want to get a space station.
We need space stations.
How much more do you want to invest? What else are you going to get?
So I have 4 cruisers, I have 8 frigates, and I have a battleship. And I don't know, I hesitate to get more frigates, but I don't know what I would get if I got more cruisers. Then what we should also say is you're really spoiled for choice when you're building your fleet. The plastic kits, and almost all the ships are plastic kits except for the really big ships. the plastic kits make every ship in that class.
Right.
So you have cruiser sets, and the cruiser sets they have all the bits you need to make. It's usually 2 cruisers per box, and you can make both or either of them any cruiser that you want. So it's not like a GW where you get enough bits to make one of each. No, you can make both of them the same kind, you can make 2 different kinds, and you can make any kind available to your fleet. The downside of that is you have to kind of lock in your choice. I don't know. I mean, the bits are really tiny. I don't know if you there's all kinds of cool little bits. It's not just weapons slots coming in and out. It's totally
very different. Like the silhouettes.
The silhouettes are very different. I'm sure someone who's really good with magnets could do it. I
don't know. It's probably not worth the effort.
Yeah. So I don't know if I like. I kind of want to get some cruisers, and I kind of want to get some frigates, and so I think I'm going to need another starter fleet. That's what I think.
Go.
So that's a starter fleet is 3 cruisers and 4 frigates, and I think that's probably the way to go.
That's probably the smartest move, actually. Yeah, I'm actually really.
Now, you have some stuff still to build, though.
I do. I have. I got a couple more boxes than you did, just because it happened to be available. One thing we should say that convention pricing on
in this game
from TT Combat is way better than online. So if you see it at a convention and you're remotely interested, that's where to buy it. And so at Gen Con, so as you may remember, we bought into it at Adepticon, and when we were back at Gen Con, they were there again, and they so happened to have more of the stuff.
They had everything except for the cruises that I needed.
So that's where we got our battleships. And I got my another box of capital ships. So now I'm at a place where I think I have pretty good variety, and I probably want more of the exotic stuff. It's also a super big ship that I think that I don't have yet, so I kind of want that. But at this point, I kind of feel like I have everything, and I probably just want to add 1 or 2 more of other elements. But it's more to play more and find out. And I also want to bling the game out now. So I'm in the middle of painting my ships. I'm doing a fun dip process with mine. I'm kind of experimenting with that. So I'm using Army Painter Red to get the ships red, and then I'm just highlighting some windows and the guns and all the other bits, and then just dipping the whole thing in their dip. And I'm pretty pleased with the results, actually. It brings a lot of detail out, and I don't have to do a lot of work. So I've got about all my frigates done. I've got 2 out of my 4 capital ships done, 2 out of my 5 capital ships done, and then I got to do the battleship. So once all that's done, then I'll move on to.
Now, have you built all your capital ships? All your cruisers? They're all built?
Everything that's currently. No, I still could build 1 more cruiser, and I could build 3 more frigates.
Okay. So
but I don't know what I want to build yet, so I want to play more to find out what I need. So I almost have enough flexibility to do something else. But I want to get a starbase now, because the starbase kits are enough where you can build several small starbases, I think, so we can build them of each side. I want to get some cool ground troops.
The space station kit is awesome because it's just 1 billion bits.
And just do it.
And you can build 5 good-sized space stations, or even more if you wanted to make them smaller.
And so it's a no-brainer. So I want to get that, and then I think we want a neoprene mat for the Warble
we have
stuff,
a vinyl mat, but it's just not quite the same thing.
It looks good, but it's not quite the same. So I kind of want to bling the game out, and then come back to more, but I also want to try the campaign modes. There's a couple different cool campaign modes. So there's a lot more to do here, and I'm looking forward to future reports with you guys as we dive deeper into Dropfleet Commander.
Yes, pip-wise.
Achievement unlocked! You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode, the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at info@the d6generation.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Thanks for listening, and happy gaming.